The air smelled of cedarwood and betrayal. Ethan Warner stood on the deck of his private lodge, overlooking Lake Arrowpine, watching the people who had quietly dismantled his life clink their glasses and laugh under the golden sunset. His wife, Claire, leaned a little too close to his brother Lucas as they toasted new beginnings and unbreakable bonds, the others. Claire's parents, her sister and brother-in-law, their aging aunt, offered hollow smiles and sipped the signature cocktails Ethan had mixed just for them. Ethan smiled too, swirling his own glass, though his drink contained no sedative, unlike theirs. Beneath each Adirondack chair surrounding the fire pit, he had carefully coiled nylon rope tucked discreetly under the cushions. The people chuckling at his expense had no idea that every sip they took brought them closer to the moment of reckoning. Claire raised her glass and said, "To family," her eyes glancing toward Lucas. Ethan raised his in return and echoed, "To truth." They all drank. No one noticed Ethan's pulse steady, or the way he scanned each face, memorizing their laughter, their complicity, their ignorance of what was about to unfold. Tonight wouldn't end with dessert. It would end with signatures, confessions, and irreversible consequences. 3 months earlier, Ethan Warner thought his life, though imperfect, was built on trust. At 41, he'd spent over a decade building the Harbor Project, a nonprofit dedicated to helping first responders cope with trauma. His wife, Claire, handled high-stakes PR campaigns for a tech firm and often boasted about how proud she was of his mission. But Ethan began to sense fractures he couldn't name. Offhand comments from her family, prolonged silences when he entered a room, a strange nervousness in his brother Lucas's presence. The first crack split open the night of the Harbor Project's 10th anniversary gala. Ethan returned to the green room to grab his notes when he overheard Claire's mother, Marilyn, whispering to her husband, Gerald, behind a curtain. "They've been careful," she said. "But if Ethan ever finds out," Gerald's reply was hushed and firm, "then we play dumb. He's too idealistic to suspect a thing." That sentence crawled under Ethan's skin and refused to leave. Still, he said nothing. Not until 2 days later, when Claire left her iPad unlocked on the kitchen island, an accident she rarely made, a single previewed message from Elle caught his eye. "Miss last night already. Dinner, wine, and you. Let's run away, like we said." He opened the thread, hundreds of messages, dates, hotel reservations, photos, intimate jokes that only years of closeness could produce, and at the center of it all, Lucas Warner, his younger brother, someone Ethan had once carried on his back through snowdrifts in childhood, who stood beside him as best man at his wedding. Every message sliced through Ethan's chest like a scalpel. "You're my home," Claire had written to Lucas just 3 weeks prior. He closed the iPad, returned it to the charger, and walked out to his backyard without saying a word. The Colorado wind whipped across his face, dry and sharp, as the reality settled in. They weren't just cheating. They were planning a life without him. And the rest of the family? They already knew. His silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. A therapist by profession, Ethan knew what masks people wore and how long they could keep them on. So he adjusted his. He smiled more. He listened deeper. And inside, he began to plan, not for confrontation, but for something far more final. Ethan didn't confront Claire. Not yet. Instead, he became a quiet investigator in his own life. A man watching shadows move behind a glass he once thought was clear. Every glance, every hushed exchange at family gatherings took on new meaning. He began cataloging behaviors the way he would with clients, touching patterns, assessing emotional tells. At Claire's niece's birthday party, he noticed Camille, Claire's sister, though he'd said nothing was wrong. Gerald often shifted the conversation away from Ethan's nonprofit whenever it came up, redirecting to Claire's amazing sacrifices at home. Lucas barely looked Ethan in the eye anymore, and when he did, it was always too fast or far too slow. Nothing in between. Ethan logged it all. He drove by Lucas's condo on a night Claire claimed she was working late and found her car parked discreetly 2 blocks away. He didn't get out, just stared at the glowing windows above, one of them flickering with a television reflection. It was confirmation, not surprise. A week later, Ethan invited Gerald out for drinks, pretending he needed career advice over bourbon. Gerald slipped, and that sometimes people make choices that complicate things before they make sense. Ethan nodded, sipping slowly. Every sentence was a thread, and he was weaving them into a rope. From then on, he began documenting everything. Photos of receipts, screenshots of texts, audio recordings from moments he pretended to be elsewhere in the room. He visited a friend in cybersecurity to retrieve deleted messages from Claire's cloud backup. What he found was worse than he imagined. Conversations between Claire and Marilyn about how to ease Ethan out of the lodge transfer. The lodge wasn't just a home. It was part of his inheritance, a sanctuary his father had left to both Warner Brothers equally. Now it was part of their scheme. Ethan realized he wasn't the last to know. He was the only one who hadn't betrayed someone. That clarity didn't make him angry. It made him surgical. Once the emotional fog cleared, Ethan shifted fully into strategy. No longer the wounded husband, he was now the architect of consequences. He contacted Andre Jensen, a sharp, discreet property and divorce attorney whom Ethan had once counseled through PTSD. They met in a quiet cafe 2 towns over, where snow was beginning to dust the rooftops. Ethan laid out everything: evidence, timelines, names, and what he wanted: a clean severing, airtight property transfers, and a legal firewall that would leave Claire, Lucas, and the rest without claim or recourse. Andre didn't flinch. "Technically, it's all doable," he said, flipping through Ethan's stack of documents. "It's not war, but it's close," Ethan replied without blinking. "It's justice, calculated, precise." As Andre drafted legal packets individualized for each person, Ethan focused on the other part of the plan. He needed the confrontation to happen on his terms, with no chance of interruption, denial, or escape. A therapist by trade, Ethan understood sedation, what was safe, what was effective, what wouldn't raise suspicion. He visited 3 separate pharmacies across 2 counties, always paying cash, always polite. He told each pharmacist he was preparing for insomnia while traveling and wanted options. In his lodge kitchen, he tested different doses of the powdered sleep aid in fresh citrus juices and cocktails. It was tasteless, dissolved quickly, and, with careful measurement, could induce mild grogginess and docility within 30 minutes. Perfect for passive compliance, not harm. He made a chart: names, body weights, known tolerances. Gerald, for example, was a bourbon drinker with a stubborn liver. His dose needed to be slightly higher. Claire preferred white wine and tended to get tipsy fast. Lucas bragged about his iron stomach, so Ethan doubled his test dose. Each drink recipe was tailored. Noah's was a smoky mezcal margarita. Marilyn preferred gin with lime. Ethan practiced mixing them until the transitions were seamless. Beneath the deck chairs at the lake lodge, he installed thin nylon rope, harmless at first glance, but strong enough to bind. He reinforced the pool area with ambient lighting and sound so the night would feel cozy, celebratory. He even had a playlist. Ethan wasn't seeking chaos. He was creating a stage, one where truth would be served, chilled. The idea for the lake retreat didn't come from Ethan. It came from Claire. "We need a reset," she said one night over dinner, swirling her wine glass. What better way than a weekend at the lodge with everyone? Her tone was light, her smile effortless, but Ethan caught the faint trace of calculation in her eyes. He played his part perfectly. "That actually sounds great," he replied, reaching for her hand side. Gears were already turning. Claire thought this weekend would be her moment, her stage, to introduce Lucas formally, with the entire family around to buffer the blow. What she didn't know was that Ethan had already seen the email, a thread between her and Lucas, plotting to reveal their relationship during a lakeside toast. They planned to frame it as honest, overdue love, believing Ethan's non-confrontational nature would lead to a silent surrender. Within a week, everyone RSVP'd. Marilyn and Gerald were thrilled. Camille offered to bring wine, and Lucas, Camille's caption it a casual, "Looking forward to it, bro." Ethan responded with a thumbs up emoji, then called Andre. "We're on, have the documents ready by Friday." In the days leading up to the gathering, Ethan deep cleaned the lodge himself. Every room, every drawer. He stocked the bar. Cocktail glasses were lined up like chess pieces on the patio table, and sedative packets were stored in a locked travel case in his toiletries bag. He even labeled each one. The night before departure, as Claire packed swimsuits and trail shoes, Ethan stepped outside, breathed in the crisp alpine air, and stared at the still waters of Lake Arrowpine. The lodge buzzed with laughter and clinking glassware as the family settled in on arrival day. Claire greeted her parents with warm hugs. Lucas carried in extra firewood, like the helpful brother-in-law he was pretending to be, and Camille snapped photos of the view from the wraparound porch, already planning her Instagram captions. Ethan moved through it all like a gracious host, smiling, handing out drinks, giving room assignments. No one noticed how often he checked his watch, or how his fingers lingered on the rim of each personalized cocktail glass. As dinner approached, the golden hour cast a soft glow over Lake Arrowpine, reflecting the illusion of warmth and unity. Claire curled into a chair beside Lucas as the family gathered near the fire pit, all of them wrapped in blankets and false comfort. Ethan stood behind the bar. He had carefully arranged, garnishes prepped, glasses polished, the sedatives already stirred into each drink. He made small talk with Gerald about fishing trips and discussed hiking trails with Noah, all while counting heartbeats and memorizing behavior. When Claire raised her glass for a toast, her voice rang sweet and clear, "To family." Ethan lifted his own and spoke with deliberate calm, "To truth, because life has a way of revealing it, eventually." The group laughed, a little awkwardly, and drank deeply. The sun dipped below the trees. The stage was set. The storm was minutes away. It started subtly, the way Diana blinked slower than usual, how Noah chuckled mid-sentence and then seemed to forget what he was saying. Claire rubbed her temples and murmured something about altitude fatigue, while Gerald leaned back in his chair with an audible yawn. One by one, Ethan's guests began to unravel. Their movements slow, their words grew looser, more fragmented. Ethan, ever the attentive host, suggested they move down to the lower patio near the fire pit to enjoy the breeze and maybe grab a few photos before it got too dark. They followed without protest, each settling into the Adirondack chairs arranged in a wide circle around the glowing embers. The sedatives had taken hold. Not strong enough to knock them out, but just enough to weaken resistance and blur reflexes, exactly as planned. Ethan moved easily between them, handing out water, adjusting blankets, even cracking a few jokes, but every time he leaned over to fluff a cushion or tuck in a throw, his hands worked beneath the seat, threading nylon rope through anchor loops and gently securing wrists under layers of fleece. It was almost elegant, the way he moved. Calm, practiced, methodical. Lucas was the last. His head lolled slightly as Ethan knelt beside him. "Meg, you okay?" he slurred. Ethan smiled and tightened the knot. Never better. By the time he returned to his seat, the only chair without bindings, his entire audience was in place, breathing softly, eyes glazed but open. The lights from the patio cast golden rings across the deck. It looked like a family gathering, but what was coming wasn't conversation, it was reckoning. At 9:00 p.m. sharp, Ethan heard 3 slow knocks at the back entrance. Andre had arrived. Showtime. Ethan rose slowly from his chair, the only one not bound, and walked to the center of the circle, where flickering firelight danced across faces now flushed from both sedation and confusion. Claire blinked at him, her brow furrowed. Lucas attempted to lift his arm, only to discover it anchored. A chorus of questions began to bubble. His voice, when it came, was measured, controlled, therapeutic. "You're all here tonight because you've mistaken my silence for blindness. But I see clearly now. Every look, every lie, every betrayal." He walked slowly from one chair to the next, making deliberate eye contact. "Gerald, you helped Lucas research how to remove my name from the deed to this lodge. Camille, you told Claire to just be discreet until the timing felt right. Diana, you said nothing, because some things are better left alone." He turned to Claire, her lips trembling. "And you, my wife, you were going to announce your relationship with Lucas tonight over a toast. You were going to blindside me in front of this entire family, thinking I'd be too embarrassed to react." Lucas opened his mouth to protest, but Ethan cut him off with a glance. "You don't get to speak yet." Andre emerged from the shadows, briefcase in hand, placing it on the patio table and pulling out a clipboard. "Each of you will receive documents crafted with your names, your signatures, your consequences. They are settlement agreements, asset relinquishments, and non-disclosure forms." He began to distribute the packets one by one. "Tonight, we sign, not out of violence, but clarity." Ryan, Camille's husband, attempted a laugh. "You drugged us, man. This won't hold up." Ethan stepped closer. "You'd rather explain this in court or to your board? The documents are voluntary, Ryan, but the silence surrounding your complicity won't be." The air thickened with guilt and flickering firelight. "This is not revenge," Ethan said, looking each one of them in the eye. "This is a boundary, a mirror, and a final warning. If you play with people's trust, don't be shocked when they stop playing." Claire began to cry. Lucas stared at the flames. Ethan folded his hands behind his back, calm, composed. The confrontation had begun, and no one was walking away untouched. One by one, Andre placed the legal packets into their sedated hands, each one tailored not just to their role in the betrayal, but to their core fear. Gerald's agreement stripped him of his influence in Ethan's nonprofit and invalidated a shadow trust he'd quietly drafted on Claire and Lucas's behalf. Camille and Noah were required to sign non-disclosure agreements that barred them from speaking publicly or privately about the events of that weekend, or they would face a six-figure penalty. Diana's packet was thinner, but perhaps the most personal, revoking her long-standing guardianship designation in Ethan's estate and severing any future legal association. Ethan had drafted every clause, with Andre's help, ensuring that every signature would hold under legal scrutiny. The sedatives left them groggy, not incapacitated. Ethan stood behind Claire as she stared down at the stack of documents detailing the full forfeiture of her claims to the lake house, joint investment accounts, and even her access to Ethan's insurance benefits. Her voice cracked. "You don't have to do this," Ethan replied without hesitation. "I didn't have to love you either, but I did, and you used that as a weapon." Lucas resisted until Ethan revealed a printed transcript of emails exchanged between him and a junior financial advisor, proof of Lucas's attempts to forge Ethan's e-signature on preliminary asset transfers. The blood drained from his face. The entire scene unfolded under the pale patio lights, quiet but devastating. Ethan didn't yell, didn't gloat. He just watched as each one of them, cornered not by force but by consequence, signed away their leverage, their secrets, and their control. The pen became their confession, the signatures their sentence. And Ethan, he became the man they never saw coming. As the last signature dried beneath Andre's notary stamp, the lodge fell eerily silent, the kind of silence that follows a storm. Not relief, but stunned stillness. Ethan moved from chair to chair, untying wrists with the same calm precision he had used to bind them. No one fought, no one even spoke. Diana wiped at her eyes, but said nothing. Gerald looked away when Ethan reached him, unable to meet his gaze. Camille opened her mouth to apologize, but Claire remained seated even after her ropes were loosened, her mascara streaked down her cheeks, shoulders trembling beneath a shawl. "Do you hate me?" she asked, her voice brittle, broken. Ethan paused only a moment. "No," he replied. "Hate implies I still care. What I feel now is distance. That's worse." She looked down, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt taller than her, not in pride, but in freedom. Lucas didn't speak at all. He simply stood, jaw clenched, eyes empty, and walked toward the house without looking back. The others followed suit, gathering their things with slow movements like people leaving a funeral. Ethan watched them go without a word. There was nothing left to explain. Only the crackling fire remained, casting long shadows across the patio. Ethan exhaled deeply, not in triumph, but in release. The ropes were gone, the lies exposed, the burden lifted. For the first time in over a year, he was no longer surrounded by people pretending to love him. He was alone, and that felt like peace. 3 weeks later, Ethan stood in the echoing stillness of the now empty lake house, sunlight pouring through the tall windows onto the polished wooden floors. The couple who had purchased it, a young pair of teachers expecting their first child, were set to arrive by noon. Ethan had already signed the closing papers that morning, transferring the deed and saying goodbye to a place that once held both his fondest dreams and deepest betrayal. As he set the keys on the kitchen counter, he didn't feel grief, only clarity. This place had served its purpose, not as a home, but as a stage for truth. The funds from the sale were wired directly into the expansion of the Harbor Project, now opening 2 new trauma centers in rural areas. Ethan worked with quiet focus, his face no longer weighed down by anxiety or pretense. He had relocated his own office to a new building in a quieter district, brighter, more open. The brass sign read, "Harbor Renewal, Counseling for Betrayal Recovery." His first clients came in slowly. One even asked, half joking, "You're that guy, right? The one with the lake house story?" Ethan smiled. "I'm someone who understands what survival feels like." He had heard Claire and Lucas had moved out west. Lucas resigned quietly from his firm. No lawsuits ever came. Too much risk. Too many secrets. Occasionally, Ethan would receive a voicemail from Gerald or Camille. Weak attempts at reconciliation. He never responded. The price of silence had already been paid. Now, everything he gave was to people who truly needed it. Months had passed, but Ethan still remembered the feel of the rope in his hands, the silence around that fire pit, and the weight of betrayal lifting from his chest as each signature was inked. Yet now, sitting in his new office, sunlight dancing across framed degrees and plants he actually remembered to water, what lingered wasn't vengeance, it was reclamation. Healing hadn't come from the confrontation itself, that was merely the incision. The real repair began afterward, in the quiet moments when Ethan could breathe without suspicion, when he no longer had to decode glances or question footsteps. For the first time in over a year, his life wasn't about managing anyone else's deceit. It was about cultivating his own peace. He journaled again. He slept through the night. And in sessions with clients blindsided by betrayal, he no longer spoke in theory, he spoke from scar tissue. "It's not about revenge," he would say. "It's about returning to yourself. Not the you before the pain, but the one who survived it, learned from it, and demands better." Sometimes it arrives in quiet acts of accountability, planned, patient, and precise. Ethan didn't need apologies. He didn't need the family to understand. What he needed, what he had built, was a life rooted in truth, clarity, and the absolute refusal to shrink for people who fed on his light. In the end, vengeance hadn't freed him, honesty had. And now he carried that torch forward, not to burn, but to illuminate. The story of Ethan Warner teaches us that betrayal doesn't have to break you, it can refine you. When your trust is shattered by the very people who were supposed to protect it, you face a choice: shrink into silence or rise with intention. Ethan didn't lash out impulsively. He observed, prepared, and confronted his truth with strategy and strength. He didn't seek revenge to destroy, and in doing so, he reclaimed not just his property or his peace, but his identity. The real victory wasn't the signatures or the silence of those who wronged him. It was the life he forged afterward, rooted in purpose, clarity, and self-respect. If you've ever been betrayed, manipulated, or cast aside by people you trusted, this story reminds you that healing is possible and power can return quietly but permanently. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of transformation, truth, and justice. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is becoming untouchable.